Somewhere in the basement of the Pentagon, in a room with no windows and no cell service, a general is staring at a screen. The simulation has just ended. His forces lost. Not because of bad luck. Not because of a surprise attack. Because the enemy knew exactly where every ship, every aircraft, and every satellite was, before the first shot was fired. That scenario has been run 19 times. The United States lost 18 of them. Now here is what you need to understand. This is not a story about budget cuts. This is not a story about soldiers lacking courage or skill. This is not a story about one bad weapons program. This is a story about something far more serious, a fundamental shift in the balance of military power that has been building for 2 decades, and that most Americans have no idea is happening. There is a classified Pentagon document, partially declassified in 2021, that describes those war game results in detail. We will get to what it says. But first, you need to understand how the world's most powerful military ended up here. Cast your mind back to January 1991. You are an Iraqi general watching American forces assemble in Saudi Arabia. You have the 4th largest army in the world. You have tanks, artillery, fighter jets, and 1 million men under arms. You are not afraid. You have faced war before. 43 days later, it is over. Operation Desert Storm destroyed your military so completely, so efficiently, that the entire campaign felt less like a war and more like a demonstration. The United States did not just win. It won in a way that sent a message to every government on the planet: do not fight America in a conventional war. You will lose. Quickly. China heard that message. Russia heard it. Iran heard it. And then, for the next 20 years, they did something about it. Here is what changed everything. Instead of trying to match the United States tank for tank, jet for jet, which they could never afford, these countries built something different. They built systems specifically designed to neutralize America's greatest advantages. The Carrier Strike Group. The Forward Air Base. The Satellite Network. The GPS-guided weapons that made Desert Storm so one-sided. China's answer to the American aircraft carrier was the Dongfeng 21 Delta, what the Pentagon calls the carrier killer. A ballistic missile with a range of 1,500 kilometers, maneuverable enough to track a moving ship, fast enough that a carrier has less than 12 minutes of warning from the moment of launch. For the first time in 80 years, the aircraft carrier, the centerpiece of American power projection, is vulnerable in ways its designers never anticipated. And it is not just the carrier. According to a 2023 report from the Congressional Budget Office, the average age of America's fighter jet fleet is now 28 years. You are flying aircraft designed when the Soviet Union still existed, maintained by mechanics who were not yet born when those planes rolled off the assembly line. The F-15 Eagle entered service in 1976. The B-52 bomber, still flying combat missions today, was designed in 1948. Stay with me on this. If you have watched this far, you already understand more about America's military vulnerability than most people who vote in American elections. Subscribe if you want to keep going deeper on stories like this, and drop a comment below telling me which threat you think is most serious. The comments on this channel are genuinely worth reading. But here is the part most analysts miss. The vulnerability is not just physical. It is digital. And in some ways, that is the more dangerous problem. In 2015, hackers working for Chinese intelligence broke into the United States Office of Personnel Management. What they took was not weapons blueprints or satellite codes. They took personnel files. 21 million of them. Names, addresses, financial histories, psychological evaluations, and the identities of intelligence officers operating undercover overseas. In one operation, without firing a single shot, a foreign government potentially identified every American spy in Asia. Then in 2020, a cyber attack called SolarWinds, later attributed to Russian intelligence, quietly installed surveillance software inside the networks of 18,000 organizations. Among them, the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, and the National Nuclear Security Administration. The attackers had access for 9 months before anyone noticed. 9 months. This is not the kind of vulnerability that more aircraft carriers fix. This is not a problem you solve by adding another destroyer to the Pacific Fleet. This is a new domain of warfare, one where the United States built the infrastructure that the entire world depends on, the Internet, GPS, satellite communications, and is now more exposed than any other nation precisely because of how deeply it relies on those systems. A Rand Corporation report from 2019 laid it out plainly. In a conflict over Taiwan, Chinese forces would not need to destroy the American Pacific Fleet. They would need to blind it. Cut the satellite links. Jam the GPS signals. Flood the communications networks with false data. And the ships, the aircraft, and the missiles, worth hundreds of billions of dollars, become significantly less effective. The USS Fitzgerald collision in 2017 showed another dimension of this problem. A guided missile destroyer, one of the most sophisticated warships ever built, failed to detect a cargo ship and collided with it in calm waters in broad daylight. 7 sailors died. The investigation found systemic failures in training, culture, and leadership that had accumulated over years of operational pressure and deferred maintenance. Now we get to that document. The Pentagon's partially declassified War Games summary from 2021 describes a series of simulations modeling a conflict scenario in the Taiwan Strait. In 18 of 19 simulations, the Blue Force, representing the United States and its allies, lost. The reasons varied. Sometimes it was the missile saturation problem, China launching so many ballistic and cruise missiles simultaneously that American defense systems were overwhelmed. Sometimes it was the communications blackout. Sometimes it was simply the geography, the United States fighting 10,000 kilometers from home, China fighting in its own backyard. The document does not say America cannot win a war. What it says is that America cannot win a war the way it won Desert Storm. The assumptions that shaped American military planning for 30 years, that carriers are safe, that air superiority is guaranteed, that satellite communications are reliable, those assumptions no longer hold in a conflict with a near-peer adversary. And the Strait of Taiwan is not a hypothetical. It is the most likely flashpoint for the most consequential military confrontation of the 21st century. China has stated publicly, repeatedly, that it considers Taiwan part of its territory and that reunification is a matter of historical inevitability. The United States has stated, with varying levels of clarity, that it would defend Taiwan. Those two positions cannot both be true at the same time. What happens when they collide depends, in large part, on whether the vulnerabilities described in that Pentagon document have been fixed. They have not been fully fixed yet. So here is where we land. First, the physical hardware gap is real. An aging fleet, a carrier vulnerable to ballistic missiles it was never designed to face, and a replacement program, the F-35, that has faced 11 years of documented technical problems. These are not opinions. They are in the congressional record. Second, the digital vulnerability may be the more serious long-term problem. A military that cannot trust its communications, its GPS, or the security of its personnel records is a military fighting with one hand behind its back, regardless of how much it spends on ships and jets. Third, and this is the one that should concern you most, the United States is no longer the only country that can project decisive military force at a distance. China's Navy recently surpassed the U.S. Navy in total number of hulls. Russia has deployed the S-400 air defense system, with its 400-kilometer reach, to multiple theaters. The era of unchallenged American military dominance that began on the sands of Kuwait in 1991 is over. What comes next has not yet been decided. Do you think the United States military is doing enough to close these gaps before a real crisis forces the question? Tell me in the comments, I read every single one. The most dangerous enemy is not the one who attacks you. It is the one who spends 20 years studying exactly how you would fight, and then builds the tools to make sure you cannot.